now. You're good to go.
Okay. All righty. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call to order the January 19th, 2021 Bridgewater Town Council meeting to order. I'd like to start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All righty. We don't have any condolences tonight, but I'd like to take a moment of silence for any veterans or first responders that have passed. Thank you. Just reminding everyone that this meeting is being recorded. It's being aired live and recorded. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, GLC 30A, paragraph 18, and the governor's March 15, 2020 order imposing strict limitations on the number of people that may gather in one place, this meeting of the Bridgewater Town Council will be conducted via remote participation to the greatest extent possible. There will be no in-person attendance permitted. Citizens who wish to tune in to this meeting may do so via Facebook Live. I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the January 5th, 2020 meeting.
So moved.
I got to move in.
Second.
Fred, you're on mute, just to let you know. I got you as a second. Mr.
Yes.
Fitzgibbons, any discussion?
Nothing, thank you.
Mr. Chase?
No, nothing.
Any questions from any other counselors? Okay, this requires a roll call vote.
Mr. Fitzgibbons.
Yes.
Mr. Columbotus is not here yet. Mr. Souza.
Yes.
Mr. Rushton.
Yes.
Mr. George.
Yes.
Mr. Wood.
Yes.
Mr. Chase.
Yes.
Mrs. Loesch.
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher.
Yes.
8 in favor, none against.
Okay, I do not have any announcements. I do not have any proclamations. Citizens
Mr.
open floor.
President,
Yes.
could I make a motion to take item J out of order?
You may take that item J out of order. Is there a second?
Second.
Second? Any discussion?
I think we should get through the joint meeting first and let the folks who are here for that particularly be able to move on. That's all.
Any additional questions? Okay, this requires a roll call vote.
Mr. Gallagher.
Yes.
Mrs. Loesch. Mrs. Loesch.
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Chase.
Yes.
Mr. Wood.
Yes.
Mr. George.
Yes.
Mr. Rushton.
Yes.
Mr. Souza.
Yes.
Mr. Fitzgibbons.
Yes.
8 in favor, none against.
All right, moving on to item J, joint meeting with town manager, finance committee, and school committee chair or designee. Let me see, is Mr. Dolan on?
I am, sir.
Mr. Dolan, would you like to start your meeting?
Yes, sir. I'm actually just scrolling through. There's quite a bit of screens here. I need to make sure I have a quorum.
And actually, it's a good question. Do we have a quorum of the finance committee?
Yes, we do.
Okay,
I'm gonna recheck though, Council.
okay, thank you.
If there's anyone from the school committee on, I see 4 phone numbers. If you are on via phone number, if you could just identify yourself as a school committee member, I'd appreciate that.
Appreciate everyone's patience. This is our first joint meeting, I believe, via Zoom, so not like we're all sitting in the same room this time.
So, Mr. George, we do not have a quorum, so I don't need to gavel us into session at this point. But we can continue because according to the charter, I'm the only one that needs to be
Okay.
here.
Okay. Finance Committee, I believe they have a quorum, so they need to open their meeting, if I'm not mistaken.
We do have a quorum. This is Nathan Schofield. I am going to open up the Town of Bridgewater Finance Committee meeting, joint meeting at 7:09 p.m.
Okay. All right, Mr. Dolan, I will turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Mr. George. Mr. Swenson is on as well. I thought we could start, Mr. Swenson, I'll turn it to you to start, and then I can certainly jump in where needed. We had our budget meeting this evening, and we will continue to work through our budget as we always do with you and Mr. Salmonte and Mr. Dutton. But Mr. Swenson, are you?
Thank you, Mr. Dolan. Just want to thank the members of Bridgewater Town Council for having and hosting our joint town meeting as we do each year. A little bit different, obviously, this year than most. We're virtual and via Zoom, as most of our meetings are these days. But as Mr. Dolan just stated, we just had our budget subcommittee meeting. I did present my preliminary budget that I will be presenting to the full committee at next week's school committee meeting, which is again via Zoom next week, next Wednesday, January 27th at 7 p.m. at that time. As I do every year, basically, we present what I now call our student success plan budget. Our student success plan is our strategic plan that has 4 pillars that we base all of our budgeting upon. The first pillar being safe and supportive schools. Our second pillar, curriculum and instruction. Then technology and facilities. And basically this process begins back in October when we begin to meet with all of our building principals and department heads. And we ask them to come in and based upon those 4 pillars, advocate for what they feel as though they need their buildings and their departments to run at an optimal level. This is a needs-based budget as it is every year.
Mr. Swenson?
Yes.
Sorry, I need to ask you to hold on one moment. We now have a quorum of the school committee. So the time being 7:10, I'd like to call the school committee meeting to order. All set, Mr. Swenson. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Dolan. So, each and every year we talk about our budget assumptions. Basically that this is a needs-based budget. It is based upon our student success plan, and it provides our learners resources and supports for teaching and learning, and obviously meets all of our contractual, retiree, regulatory, legal, and statutory obligations. We do have many cost avoidance measures built into our budget each and every year. We do collaborative bidding with other area districts in order to get our supplies and resources at a much more competitive price. We do all of our in-house snow removal each and every year under the direction of our Director of Facilities, Bob Pacheco. We have in-house licensed maintenance staff. We currently have a licensed electrician, a licensed carpenter, and plumber. And in this budget, which I'll talk about in a little bit, when we are advocating for positions, we are going to be advocating for an in-house HVAC consultant as well. We do quite a bit with our special education population. One of our biggest goals is to keep our students within the districts in which they live to be educated. Those students who may have more significant needs may need to go to out-of-district placements, which can be quite costly in terms of tuition, but also transportation. So over the course of the last several years, we've created a lot of in-district special education programs that have been a cost avoidance measure in order to avoid those high tuitions and transportation. Some of the cost drivers within this budget, we do have aging facilities. Our youngest building right now is going on 11 years old, and that is the Bridgewater Rainham Regional High School. Technology is always a cost driver, and that is because too it moves so quickly. And we're not only talking about devices, but we also have to keep our infrastructure strong in order to support all of the different devices and programs and networks that we bring in to our district. We have our contractual obligations to all of our collective bargaining units, our teachers, our ESPs or paraprofessionals, our secretarial and custodial and maintenance. And of course, all of our insurances, health, liability, property, and unemployment insurances. Transportation is a great cost driver, even though regional transportation, when they were first talked about regional transportation, one of the incentives to regionalize was that the state was going to reimburse regionalization districts 100% of their transportation costs, with the caveat if funding was available. Since that time, funding has not been fully available. So we always teeter between about 60 to 70% reimbursement for the state under Chapter 71. Special education tuitions we just talked about are a huge cost driver. Collaboratives for an audit district might be anywhere from $50,000 to $75,000 with transportation. And some of our private schools that we work with could be anywhere from $100,000 up to $200,000 when it comes to tuition and transportation cost. And the biggest cost driver in this budget will be our additional staffing. And I'm just going to briefly walk you through our what I am going to be advocating for in my preliminary budget in regards to staffing, and would be happy to answer any questions after this. First, on the Bridgewater side, we are looking at Bridgewater Middle School. We're looking for a school adjustment counselor. We've talked about the social emotional needs of our students over the course of the last several budgets and several years. This year in particular, with the pandemic, we're seeing an even higher spike in social emotional issues with our students. One concern that we have this school year was the number of our kindergarten class is much lower than it has been over the course of several years. We always go by trend when we're looking at class size. So what we're going to do is proactively try to advocate for a K or 1 school teacher at the Mitchell Elementary School next year. Our thought being is that many parents may have, due to the pandemic, not enrolled their child within kindergarten this school year. It is not mandated in the state of Massachusetts. So our concern is next year, hopefully we're back to normal with a full reentry, and that if we do encounter that, we may have a bit of a spike in that number, and to proactively try to offset higher class sizes in those formative years, we're going to proactively build in a K-1 teacher at the Mitchell Elementary School. On the Rainham side, we have at the Merrill Elementary School, a speech and language pathologist. We have an SLP right now on the Rainham side, whose caseloads are close to 80 to 90 students, which is becoming an incredibly daunting task. And these are services that our special education students need. So obviously we want to be in compliance with the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education's special education regulations. So we're advocating for a speech pathologist on the Rainham side. At the high school, we're looking for 1 business teacher. That is a department that has had somewhat of a skeleton staff over the course of the last few years. One thing that we do want to press upon, the council and members of the audience is that we are creeping upon NEASC, which is our rating that impacts accreditation of high schools. And one thing that they do look at is the amount of electives that are provided in the different departments. And right now, I would say the business department has the least of all of our departments at the high school. So Mrs. Watson, the building principal, is advocating for one business teacher. Then we look at our district-wide positions. This year, we have done a great amount of work with a educational consultant firm called L&P Educational Consultants in the areas of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And this evening and next week, I will be advocating for a diversity, equity, and inclusion coordinator at the district level that would service both sides of the district and the high school. We're also looking for a coordinator of teaching and learning similar to who we have with Mrs. Richards, who has done a wonderful job. And she's really been focused on literacy and humanities and looking at the social studies curriculum currently. We are looking for a STEM position to come in, and that would be an individual who would look over our science, technology, engineering, and mathematics programs. We really truly want this individual to come in, really examine our current programs, resources, and really kind of bring us, up to speed when it comes to current trends and in these areas, so that we can in turn raise those district-wide assessments that we have in the areas of science and mathematics. We're also looking for a network technician for our technology department. Right now, our technology department is a department of 3. That is one IT manager with 2 technicians for a district with 5,500 students and over 600 employees. So sometimes those break-fix issues can become rather daunting for that department. So we are advocating for an additional technician. And also a special education speech pathologist for our pre-K program. And the reason why we say this is district-wide is because pre-K is a regionalized special education integrated program. It's currently housed at the Rainham Middle School. But once the new project is complete at 500 South Street in Bridgewater for the new Mitchell Elementary School, that preschool program will be moving back into that site. And it is a situation similar to what I just stated on the Rainham side, with the caseloads being high. For the K1 speech pathologists, they're quite high too for speech pathologists at the pre-K. Right as of last year, we had a situation where we put our assistant district treasurer into the treasurer's position, and we never replaced her position, and that's Natasha Robichaux, the assistant treasurer's position. So right now, we're not looking for an actual assistant treasurer, but we are looking for someone from more of an administrative assistance lens that could help with record keeping and data entry that would really support that that department. And again, it would be a cost savings in that we're not going to move forward with a salary for an assistant treasurer, but more of one of an administrative assistant. From a facility standpoint, we're looking for that HVAC technician that I discussed before earlier. I will say this is a cost avoidance measure. As you know, everything with the pandemic and COVID, we've had to do a lot with our HVAC systems and the assessment of our HVAC systems, and do a lot of preventative maintenance with those systems throughout the district. Next year, we would be entering a contract with some outside vendors at a cost of about $120,000 for preventative maintenance costs for HVAC. We're looking at this as a cost avoidance in that we could hire someone, in-house in the $80,000 range, and that's a contractual number under the custodial maintenance and grounds CBA. So that would be a cost avoidance measure for the district. And it would also be great to have someone on site where you don't have to wait for that outside vendor. It could be a day or two before they get on site, depending upon their workload. So at that point, we'd have a maintenance crew of a licensed carpenter, plumber, construction, and an HVAC technician. And finally, we're advocating for 2 custodians. When we did have the roof collapse in 2015 in the Mitchell, we absorbed the 5-person crew that was at the Mitchell and distributed them throughout the district. Since that time, many have retired, and we've never replaced those custodians. Right now, with a tentative date of August of 2022 of opening the new Mitchell project, we have to start to build back that custodial staff. We currently have 2 on staff. We're asking for an additional 2, and then next year in my FY23 budget, I'll be asking for that one last additional custodian, and that would allow us then to have that full custodial staff at the Mitchell Elementary School. So it is a total of 12 positions, 2 on the Bridgewater side, 1 on the Rainham side, 1 at the high school, and 8 positions that would service our students district-wide. So with that being said, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Mr. Swenson, I'm going to review the timeline before we open up for questions, if that's okay for everyone.
Absolutely. Thank you.
We have upcoming budget subcommittee meetings, February 11th, March 9th, March 17th, April 13th, and May 11th. As Mr. Swenson said, he's going to be presenting his budget to us as a full committee next Wednesday, the 20th. Our public hearing for the budget will be on March 10th. All of these meetings are via Zoom, and we will vote to adapt the budget on March 24th after review and working again with both towns. And then with the hope that the towns will vote our budget sometime in May. So that is the time we're operating on at this point. Last year that was adjusted a bit because of COVID. Hopefully that won't be the case this year, but we will be flexible, as they say, like Gumby.
That's a good thing. Any questions for Mr. Dolan or Mr. Swenson?
Mr. George, if I might.
Mr. Fitzgibbons.
Yeah, and I see Miss Macedo's here, and it's probably more directed toward her, though if Mr. Swenson can answer it, I'd certainly accept his answer. We've been through the needs-based budget, et cetera, many times, and we understand that it's going to be a very big increase that it's going to look like to the towns, and we get that. But what I'd like to know is what's the baseline? What if we did nothing? We just kept the same store going. What would be the percentage increase in expenses from this current year to the next year? Do we know that?
That would, go
Um,
ahead, Kath.
that we would be somewhere around a 3.7% increase.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Macedo. I appreciate that. So anything above and beyond that is kind of a new ask, so to speak. I mean, not exactly, but close enough in
Or
terms of
just salary-
what
or
folks
just
are
various
watching.
increases with COLAs and things like that.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Any other questions for Mr. Dolan or Mr. Swenson?
I could, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. Rushton.
First of all, thank you very much to Derek and the entire school committee that's here tonight. I just want to say on behalf of at least myself and probably fellow counselors, you've done an incredible job navigating all of the complexities of COVID over the past year. I've been very impressed with the level of communication and everything that's gone on. So I just wanted to thank the school committee, Superintendent Swenson, and all of the teachers and staff in the district. You've done really an incredible job. You touched upon something tonight that's really important to me, and that is you talked about the LNP consultants and your intention to hire somebody at the high school level on diversity, equity, inclusion. And I just had a quick question for you. I guess my thought is, why not district-wide? Why at the high school? I guess listening to it initially, I think the younger that we can assist students and educate students, the better. So why at the high school? Is there a current problem at the high school that you want to address, or is it financial?
So,
I'm sorry, Mr. Dolan. Go
no,
ahead.
all means, Quentin, if you feel like you want to jump in after, all means. Thank you, Mr. Rushton. That is actually a district-wide position, so they will be supporting our initiatives pre-K through 12. That it's not something that will just focus on the high school students, because to your point, it is something that we want to start incorporating into all levels of our curriculum and introduce early into the district and into the everyday life of our students.
Okay, I must have just misinterpreted the way it was laid out. I appreciate that. I'm also a very strong supporter of the social emotional staff and an increase in that area, given what many of the students are going through, even pre-COVID. So I'm happy to see that being considered in the budget. But one thing I just wanted to ask, when we talk about CARES Act, temporary positions in the district, funding that the district has taken under the CARES Act, and how those positions have been incorporated into the district, are you planning on coming forward with those that now need to be funded by the two towns? Will you be continuing to see funding under the CARES Act to get us through the next fiscal year? Or are there no positions currently funded under CARES Act and it's really been PPE and that kind of stuff?
That's a great question, Mr. Rushton. We have hired some positions under CARES Act monies that if we were to move forward, post-COVID, and they were no longer necessary, we would not be carrying them in our operational budget. They are basically positions that we have hired just to kind of get us through the parameters that have been set with the pandemic. So there would not be anything that we would be carrying through that is currently being paid, through CARES Act funding that would then be incorporated within our operational budget costs. We are being told through the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education with the new stimulus package that we are looking to get some additional funding relatively soon. And they're telling us, the original package that we got was about $420,000. And with that, we purchased more things than actual, positions, like Chromebooks for our students that were in need for remote learning, hotspots to help with connectivity, those types of items rather than salaries. And we're being told that the monies that are going to be coming to us, it's going to be a little bit more of an increase this time around, which we will need, because we have pretty much depleted a good portion of our tech devices throughout the district in order to support our students who needed them for remote learning. So we're going to be looking at, bringing devices back in, such as Chromebooks, also looking at some technology infrastructure projects that remote learning has kind of brought to light as well. So it's not going to be a situation where the operational budget is going to be impacted by additional staffing as a result of the pandemic.
Thank you, I appreciate it. If I could just follow up one more quick question related to CARES Act. Would you feel as though as a district that we've done a good job at, allocating as many COVID related expenses and helping the district be successful? And sort of the other piece to that, is there any funds or accounts that you expended that you were not able to be reimbursed due to COVID, particularly in the early stages of COVID before funding was available? Or do you feel that most of that's been reimbursed through the federal government?
I feel as though we're in good shape in that respect, Mr. Rushton. I think we were very proactive initially, even before we knew the funding was coming forward in the terms of our purchasing of our PPE, equipment, because we knew that many districts, obviously throughout the Commonwealth and throughout the nation, were going to be, kind of biting for the same materials and resources. So we did at that point, proactively use some end of year spending last year, which we were later able to be reimbursed through CARES Act money. So I don't see any of our, accounts where we feel there's, major concern or we're running in the red. We've been pretty, fiscally conservative when it came to the things that we're going to use our grant funding for. And we tried not to veer off that course. We realized that we needed technology, we needed PPE, we needed all of those things to get us through. And right now, I would say that, we have some, pretty healthy bottom lines in some funds, some grant funds. Some have been, depleted because they needed to, at that one point, spent down by December 30th. That has now since, been extended. But I think we're in really good shape. And I think this new influx of money through the new stimulus package is going to, be beneficial to us as well, especially, again, in the area of technology. We do a weekly management meeting, with our, our director of facilities and, our business manager and the rest. And, we make sure that, right now we're on pace right now to have a good supply of PPE to get us through the remainder of the year. And I think we're in pretty good shape, considering how difficult, this whole pandemic has been to navigate. So, I'm confident that, there's not going to be anything right now that we're going to have shortfalls in.
Excellent. I appreciate all your information. And again, thank you to you and your team.
I appreciate that, Mr. Rushton. Thank you very much.
Any other questions?
If I might, Mr. George. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I cut
That's
someone
okay,
else off?
That's okay, Counselor. Go ahead, and then I can follow up.
Oh, sure. I apologize for whoever I cut off. I've got two screens. I've only got one screen, so I don't know who talked, and I apologize for that. Just a follow-up to my earlier question, and again, Mr. Swenson, Mr. Dolan, or Ms. Macedo, whoever can answer it the best, I'd appreciate it. We talked about a 3.7% baseline increase, same store, so to speak. What historically has been the increase in Chapter 70 aid year over year? I know it varies year to year, but kind of on an average, what can the district expect?
Not enough. Sorry.
Well, obviously, that's what I'm trying to drive at, Mr. George.
For that,
So the percent increase in Chapter 70 year over year, do we have a number on that?
I don't have that with me tonight, sorry.
Okay, thank you. I was just curious if it kept up with the 3.7 or not.
Ms. Robinson, you had a question?
I did, thank you. And thank you, Mr. Swenson and Mr. Dolan for your summaries. And thank you, Mr. Swenson, for everything you've been doing for the district in a really, really difficult year. Couple of quick questions. Some of this, and I apologize if we need to take it into a different forum or a different meeting. I'm certainly happy to do that. But I had a couple of more learning questions around some of this process. One specific, though, was of these 12 positions you detailed, which ones are actually brand new to the district that have not been roles that have been in place in the past? So that's more of just kind of an understanding. And then the follow-up to that would be if there isn't an ability to fund all of those positions, how would you prioritize of what you shared? And then my third question is actually a follow-up thank you, Mr. Rushton, for asking specifically about the DEI coordinator for the district. I was curious if that was something that how that role came about. Was that something that the consultant had recommended, and who helped create that job description, or what those requirements would be for a role like that for the district?
So the first part of your question is new positions, correct? If positions that were new, totally new to the district.
Correct.
Yes. Sorry,
Right
I took myself
now,
off.
the position would be our diversity.
Oop, I think he just cut out. Did you just cut out?
Sounds like he did.
Okay.
Our STEM
Oh.
coordinator.
Mr. Swenson, sorry, you cut out there. You may want to start again.
Did you hear the first part? The diversity, equity, and inclusion coordinator is new.
Okay.
Okay.
And then the STEM coordinator is a new position. And we have not had an HVAC consultant in previous years. So I would say those three are basically the newest positions, meaning that they have not existed, prior to myself advocating for these positions in this fiscal year budget. The second question you had asked was,
How do you prioritize?
give me a
if-
framework? How?
Sure. Yeah,
well,
sure. Yeah.
So-
yeah, I kind of hit you with a bunch. So yeah, how would you prioritize, based on the needs, but then the realities of what can actually get funded?
Sure. So, I mean, it's like anything else. We look at what our greatest needs are of the district right now. And I will say that some of the greater positions, I would say within this budget, considering where we are within our social landscape and, our ever-changing, demographics within, our district, and recognizing all of the work that we're currently doing with L&P educational consultants and all the work we're putting together for our administrative team this year and looking to do with our staff overall next year. It's going to be about a 3 to 4 year commitment for this professional development. So we really want to make sure that we have an individual that is going to make sure that this important work continues and it becomes entrenched within the fabric of what the Bridgewater Raynham Regional School District is all about. So that's definitely, one of our priorities and looking at what our greatest needs are. So that would definitely be one. I know you asked about the job description. We have looked at, this is a position that, prior to working with L&P, myself and Mr. Powers and Mrs. Richards talked about, when we were negotiating our proposal with L&P, we were saying like, we're sure that, this important work gets done, to make that, after the 3 years, it's just, something on the shelf. We want to make sure teams and the support for all students continue up with, the idea of this individual. And we have looked at several job descriptions from some districts, one Burlington, we got another one Stockton a few weeks back, and we're kind of
Mr. Swenson, you're cutting out again.
kind of adapting it to what we feel like we need. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Hello?
Yes,
Yeah.
we can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
So we're trying to take all that information and make it our own. Another thing that we have to look at though, when we are prioritizing, is for our special education population, because we have to make sure that we are in compliance. So our speech pathologists that provide those services for our students that need it. Those are the kind of, when we sit back and say, okay, if we're going to get 2 or 3 different positions in, where do we feel as though our greatest needs are? So it would be in the area, I would say, in the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and special education. And then if we could get that STEM person in for curriculum, that's the direction we want to go in.
Great. Thank you so much. I appreciate
You're
that.
welcome.
Any other questions?
If I may, Mr. George, I just want to follow up with Mr. Swenson because he makes a very vital point that we need to put a real good point on. Mr. Swenson, is special education mandated by the state?
Yes, it is.
Is it funded completely by the state?
No, it is not. No, it is not.
Has the state promised Chapter 71 to fully fund regional transportation?
With the caveat, if funding is available.
Subject to appropriation. My childhood was built on subject to appropriation because my father was a state college professor. Yes,
Right.
I'm just saying we have, and I've brought this up before, and I just want to make the point that we do need to bring these issues up to our state rep and our state senator as well, because it's not just our fight, it's everyone's fight. Thank you.
Agreed. Thank you.
Any other questions? So I just have a couple things. First off, I want to say, Mr. Dolan, Mr. Swenson, school committee staff, thank you very much. I am going to turn it over to the finance committee, but again, I think Mr. Rushton said, I don't think we can say thank you enough for rolling with the punches during this pandemic. And really just bringing to light how dedicated so many people are in regards to making sure at the end of the day we're taking care of our kids. And taking care of our kids is a very large responsibility. And I hope that people that have been kind of paying attention understand that the school system, I will say personally, on top of giving people an education, serve many different roles that probably a lot of people did not realize until it became a challenge. And everyone in the district has stepped up and answered that challenge. And we've got more challenges in front of us, both for a school district as well as the town. But we'll get through it as well. I do have one personal ask. So I know that I was thinking about this. I think the last large meeting in person I went to was the budget meeting last year at the high school, which is kind of scary. And then after that, I think we clamped down. But I know that you guys put on a very good in-depth presentation on the budget. The one thing I would like to ask is when you're talking about the assessments for the towns, not including the debt service, that there's a little bit more in-depth explanation on how those assessments are actually calculated, just so people understand it. And it's probably, very intricate, but I think it would probably serve well if people understood, how those numbers are calculated. I think that would be great. So if that could be included, that would be greatly appreciated.
We can do that. Thank you, Mr. George. Absolutely.
Okay. Without any question, I'm going to turn it over to the Finance Committee. Mr. Schofield, the floor is yours.
All right. Obviously, it's been said over and over again, the incredible work that the school department has done this year in such challenging times. We do thank you. And I would ask, any of our fellow, we've heard from Susie already, if we have any other committee members that have some questions. Because I know that we'll certainly be having meetings and
It's a quiet bunch. I'm going back and forth on the screens. I don't.
Yeah.
To Mr. Schofield, before any of your members wish to speak, Mrs. Holbrook and Mr. Florence will continue to attend your meetings as representatives from the school committee. So if you do have questions as a FinCom, Mr. Florence and Mrs. Holbrook are definitely your go-to people during those meetings, but obviously outside those meetings, feel free to reach out to myself or Mr. Swenson or Dr. Prewandowski, who is the Budget Subcommittee Chair.
All right. And you said earlier, Mr. Dolan, the next meetings that are coming up with your budget committee. Could you tell me those again?
Certainly. We have February 11th,
Yep.
March 9th, March 17th, April 13th, and again on, well, hopefully we won't need it, but May 11th.
May 11th.
We'll still meet, but hopefully it will not have to do with voting for next year's budget. Hopefully that will be done.
Okay, you know, one of the things we have been discussing too as a committee, we do have some newer members too, which is exciting, is, you know, to have somebody, just like you have somebody at our meetings, we would have somebody always at your meetings that can report back to us.
We would welcome that.
Great. So, you know, I'll ask again, if anybody on the Finance Committee has any questions at the moment. And if not, I will hand it back to Mr. George.
I'm good, Nate.
Okay, thank you,
Okay.
Julie.
Great. Mr. Dutton, anything on your end, considering you're the third part of this meeting?
Thank you, Mr. President. I just a brief sort of rundown, not to belabor the point, but I think it's helpful for people both at this meeting and people watching this meeting on the various different platforms to sort of understand what goes into the budget process as we move forward. So obviously, I think as the superintendent pointed out, COVID has impacted all of us and how we provide services. So we've got the good news is that the federal government had supplied funding through what's referred to as the CARES Act for expenses that we incurred because of COVID, unbudgeted expenses that we incurred because of COVID. So we got a little bit of a Christmas present towards the end of the year when Congress and the president signed essentially an extension of the CARES Act so that we still have our allocation of CARES Act funding. And now we can continue to tap that funding for extra COVID expenses up until December 31st of 2021, rather than December 30th of 2020. So that's good news. We've used I believe over $1 million of our allocation. And actually we've, I think, worked pretty well with the district to try to help secure some of our allocation or our CARES funding where you need it. So I think that's a good success and speaks to the communication I think we've had with the district, which has been great. So just FY 2022 budget thoughts, our revenue outlook. Now I think as everybody knows, we consider property taxes relatively stable. We went through this during the last budget process that was delayed. We look at that as being relatively stable. We are very concerned about our local receipts for obvious reasons. You know, we see stores closing left and right, and we're concerned about curtailing building boom coming to an end. So we do have some concerns there, and our state aid is also uncertain at this point. We have positioned ourselves pretty darn well over the last few years to weather some of these, dips in the economy. This was a free fall at one point and continues to be concerning. Our state aid numbers from FY20, so the year we're currently in, to FY21, we secured just shy of 3.9 million. It was flat. We did not see an increase in state aid. And for FY22, we are actually budgeting for a reduction in that state aid. So we are keeping a close eye on that. I will remind everybody in the current year we're in, we did vote to take $1.6 million out of our stabilization account or our savings account, which allowed us to avoid service cuts certainly this year, and we're anticipating at least having to take another $1.6 million out of stabilization before we see a significant enough rebound in the economy to wean ourselves off of that. So that's sort of on the revenue side. On the expense side, we've identified some town priorities. Obviously, DPW facilities positions. We've also substantially increased our tentative budget on building maintenance to $350,000. We continue obviously to review our maintenance needs, and we're continuing our efforts to find grant funding, which will work to make some capital improvements, which will reduce our operating expense, green communities funding being primary among those. So we also, on the expense side, have upcoming collective bargaining negotiations. So we're attentive to that. I think everybody knows we share a 5-year projection that's quite detailed, so that we go over that with all of our bargaining units so that they know exactly where we see the town's finances in the out years. So right now, so that's sort of our expense side. On the budget resolution side, every year the council traditionally, every year that I've been involved, and I know every year that our finance director, Tony Salmonti's been involved, we've presented some language for the council to consider, and the council has voted, or the council has proposed it, and we end up voting a budget resolution. So that essentially incorporates our current policies and procedures with the town's particular fiscal year priorities, and it sort of provides that critical reference point. So in a way, it's sort of a best management practice, which this year allows us to craft an operating budget in conjunction with a capital plan. So this year we'll be presenting both an operating budget and a FY22 capital plan together, so that you can, the council can see and the schools can see that interrelationship. So we'll continue, once in place, we'll certainly continue that best management practice. We won't be voting the capital plan until we get our free cash certified and allocated after the books close. And historically, that's been sometime in August or September. But doing it that way, presenting those two things together really allows the town, allows the council and the finance committee, and certainly school committee and the people in town to see exactly why we do budget for usually it's about a 1.75% positive balance at the end of the year. We build that in to the budget, and we do that so that we can have a consistent stream of funding or stream of revenue for capital plans that both the district and the town departments can avail themselves of. So I think that's really the basis of what I wanted to just touch on. I certainly go into excruciating detail. I don't think anybody wants that, but I do, just in terms of final thoughts, we really have striven, if that's a word, to get, we strove over the past few years to really strived. Is that really a word? Well, we can take a vote next meeting.
Have you noticed, and no one on the school committee has corrected you so far? just to let you know.
Well, touche. But we do have I think a good working relationship with the district, and we'll continue that. I know we can't always provide all the funding that the schools need, quite honestly, and that. But we do our best to make sure that we can make sure that the town can provide critical services, and obviously we can educate kids to the best of our ability. So that really is it. I do want to thank the district most recently for really working really hard to come up with creative financing on the, well, I shouldn't say creative financing, to come up with a novel way to fund the Mitchell project. I think as the council knows, and some of the folks on the call may not know, the district is going out to bond a very substantial amount of the town's obligation. We're doing that, I think, tomorrow, Kathy, if I'm not mistaken. So that is really good news. That'll secure us what we suspect will be quite a favorable interest rate and hopefully quite a premium that we can put towards the project. So all of that really going towards supporting our taxpayers by doing whatever we can to do it right, but also to try to save them money wherever we can. So, and I know Tony is here. I don't know if he had any more detail, but certainly I'm happy to answer questions, or Tony's happy to answer questions.
And just as a reminder, councilors, we do have under the town manager report the 2022 budget as well. So I would like to ask if there's anyone on the school committee or anyone in the finance committee that has any questions. If I could ask the councilors to wait till the end, or at least maybe wait till the manager's report, I think that would be appreciated. Any questions, school committee? Any questions, finance committee?
Sorry, go ahead.
This is Kathy on the Finance Committee. I just had a question. In the prior years, we have provided the school committee with a target percentage for them to use sort of as a baseline. Do we have that number for this year?
I'll let Mr. Salmonti answer that one if you want, Tony.
Yes, we're holding off until the governor's budget, which I believe he would be submitting it sometime within the next few weeks, unless it's delayed. Once we have that, we will finalize what we have for our revenue estimates, and therefore the school's share of those revenue estimates.
Mr. Dolan, you had a question?
Just a Mr. George, if I could, I wanted to thank Mr. Dutton and Mr. Salmonti. I think over the past few years, we've tried really hard to work together to jointly come up with a budget that both the town can live with and provide to us, and we as a school district can continue to function on and provide the critical service of education. So I just want to thank the both of you for that, along with FinCom. I know that is a Omen's work that you all do, especially at this time of year when we talk about budgets. So I just wanted to echo the thanks from the entire committee to you folks as well.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Salmonti. Oh, okay.
Nope,
Any other?
Thank you.
Yep. Thought you were raising your hand. You know, school committee, we have to raise our hands. All right. Well, that being said, Mr. Dolan, would you like to close your meeting?
I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I make a motion.
I have a motion by Mrs. King. Do I have a second? By Mr. Florence. This does require a roll call vote. Mr. Florence.
Aye.
Holbrook.
Aye.
King.
Aye.
Dr. Prewindowski.
Aye.
Mr. Gelfi, are you on? You are no longer on. The school committee is in. Nope, there he is. Mr. Gelfi.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you,
Okay.
Mr.
Yep. Mr. Schofield, would you like to close your meeting?
Yes, thank you. I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Mr. Blunt, who's that second?
Julie.
Thank you, Julie. This does require a roll call vote. Ms. Blaze,
Aye.
Ms. Caparis,
Aye.
Ms. Robinson.
Aye. Do we allow public comment, though? Do we have members of the public here?
I don't think we've had that in the past for the joint meeting, maybe for your individual meeting.
Okay, thank you. But aye.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Blunt.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. The Town of Bridgewater Finance Committee is now closed at 8:03 p.m.
All right. Again,
Thank
We're
you.
going to citizens'
Thank you.
comments anyway to alleviate Ms. Robinson's concerns.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, so thank you very much. Both committees are welcome to stay for the meeting if you so choose. Okay, getting back onto the agenda. Item D, Citizens Open Forum. The town of Bridgewater encourages citizens to attend its meetings and welcome their views on issues of importance. A citizens open forum will be placed on each council agenda, and a citizens comment period will be included at the end of each agenda. Anyone may comment at this time for up to 3 minutes. Comments comments shall be made in a respectful manner and not cast aspersions on any individual council members or the council as a whole. The president shall have the discretion to declare any comment duplicative, excuse me. Such a declaration may be overruled with a 2/3 vote of the council. Non-residents may speak only with the approval of a vote of the council. Also, as a reminder, before speaking, please state your name and your street for the record. So is there anyone that'd like to speak for a citizens open forum? Ms. Neri.
Hello, Pat Neary, 225 Lakeside Drive. I am here tonight to speak in opposition to a proposal that you'll be hearing later regarding a marijuana ballot question. We already voted on this issue in 2016, and our council subsequently upheld that later. The question does not belong on our ballot. I realize that pot shops make you envision a financial windfall, and after the previous meeting, it's obvious that we always need additional funding. But at what cost? Don't lose sight of your responsibility to our community. We always need additional funding. What will you gain? Hundreds of pot-addled youngsters or young adults. Where there are more pot shops, there is more crime and more youth use. We must use our voices to protect future generations. The choice is ours. Some of us will choose to resist allowing and encouraging these outlets in our community. The question does not belong on the ballot. We answered that question a few years ago. No, Councilor Wood, there has not been a clear shift of public support. We still don't want or need it in our town. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to speak?
Mr. George, I see Ms. Lasivita has her
Okay.
hand up.
All right, Ms. Lasivita, the floor is yours. Please state your name and your street, please.
Wendy Lasivita at 115 Beach Street here in Bridgewater. I just wanted to briefly thank everybody who was part of the joint meeting. I attended town meetings back when we had them and have been involved with meetings of all kinds for almost 25 years. And things were not always so harmonious, shall I say, in the past. And I am so grateful that all groups involved have found a way to come together, to work together, and to really do what is in the best interest of all of those in our town, which includes our students. So thank you to all of those who have been part of that.
Thank you. Any other citizens looking to speak?
We have somebody on a phone that would like to speak.
Okay, I don't know who that is. So if someone likes to speak on a phone, please state your name and your street for the record, please.
Jennifer Smith.
Okay,
Mr.
go right
George,
ahead.
can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, thank you. It's Jennifer Smith, Boxwood Lane. I would like to address Order O, Fiscal Year 21-029, place an advisory question on the April 24th, 2021 town election by Bill Wood. I strongly oppose putting this on the ballot, and it should not be allowed. We already went through this exercise that was dragged out for over a year and wasted a lot of time. It's very convenient during a pandemic that he brings this up. It's concerning that he would possibly try to push this through during a pandemic or through a mail-in ballot while everyone else is trying to get by during these difficult times. It is deeply concerning that this is now the second time he wants to push this through in Bridgewater. As he is doing this for the second time, I question why he is advocating for multi-million-dollar drug companies over the residents who would have to deal with the negative impact pot shops would bring to this nice family town. Yes, you heard that right. Advocating for multi-million-dollar drug companies. I don't think a public servant should be advocating for multi-million-dollar drug companies that profit off people's addictions. What counselors should be worried about? The elderly in town that are fearful right now. The families that are working 2 jobs while trying to teach their children at home. The small businesses that add charm to this town that are struggling to stay open, or the children getting left behind because they cannot attend classes in person. These are the things counselors should be concerned about, not a multi-million-dollar drug company that profits off people's addiction. I respectfully ask you and the other counselors to not support this order. As I have stated before, I don't think pot shops are going to contribute to a more desirable place to live. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak?
I have another phone person, another person calling from a phone.
Okay, phone person who would like to speak, please state.
Sorry.
Please state, no, it's okay. We're rolling with it. Please state your name and your street for the record, please.
Hi, it's Taylor Sullivan here, 250 Norland Park.
Okay, we can hear you.
Okay, great. So I just wanted to say hello to everyone. Hope all is well. I'm here to express my frustration at Councillor Wood's attempt to bring recreational marijuana to our town again. You know, we have made it clear we do not support pot shops in our town. We made this clear in 2016 during a presidential election, which we all know has an extremely high voter turnout. We also made it clear for nearly 2 years following, where many residents, you know, came up to town council meetings intermittently to express not only their concern, but you know, their view that having pot shops or selling recreational marijuana in our town is a bad idea. I know Councillor Wood had stated there has been a clear shift in public support for adult use recreational marijuana. I believe that to be simply untrue. Maybe perhaps in the media, marijuana is portrayed, you know, as a less severe drug, but in reality, nothing has changed in 2 years. Marijuana is as dangerous as ever. The research on marijuana just gets worse and worse through the years. There's been more research done since 2018 in towns that allow pot shops that not only does adult use go up, but in particular, the use among people under 18 goes up. We all know the research as far as what marijuana does to the brains of not only adolescents, but really anyone under 25. If you look at the damage that marijuana causes to the brain, particularly in people under 25, that is, you know, long lasting, in fact, lasts a lifetime, you know, people would see this as not a drug that isn't harmful. And also, you know, I understand that perhaps allowing recreational marijuana in town would increase revenue, but really revenue is important to a town, of course, but no revenue is worth bringing more drugs in a town and getting more youth addicted to a gateway drug. So no amount of dollars should really change any counselor's mind on that. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart. I really hope that people wouldn't look at the dollar signs and look at what this drug does to families and what this drug does to the youth. And it's not something that can just be continuously brought up, you know, for a few dollars. Lastly, we, the people of Bridgewater Cares, we made it clear that we didn't support pot shops. And unfortunately, cultivation and medical was allowed as a compromise. But like we said then, we knew that the goalpost would continuously be moved, and that was just the beginning of it. So I implore you and your fellow counselors to not allow this question on the April ballot. In a time of intense political division and a global pandemic, we do not need to worry
Ms.
about
Sullivan,
launching another.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who actually, Mrs. Hanson, I believe you'd like to speak?
Yes. Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
This is Janet Hanson, 665 Pleasant Street. I agree with a lot of what Taylor had just said. So I'm going to try not to repeat some of the things, but I just feel that I don't think that it's what Mr.
Mrs. Hanson, we've lost you. Mrs. Hanson, we still can't hear you. And let's hold off. Is there anyone else who would like to speak?
I'm not seeing any other raised hands, and I have not received any other chats.
Okay. Let's give it just another. Oh, we've lost her. Okay.
I'm back. I'm back.
Go ahead. All right. Go ahead, Mrs. Hanson. We lost you, but you can keep going.
I lost Zoom. I just don't understand why he seems to be the only one, at least vocally, pushing for this agenda all the time. I know it's not a ballot to say yes or no. It's a poll that he wants to present. But my concern is that he's dangling the tax dollar and saying that we're missing out on revenue because people are going to outside of Bridgewater to get it and bringing it back in. We should get that money. There's no guarantee we'll get that as much money as he says. But that being said, that argument could be for anything. We losing out tax dollars for any businesses. So you can't, it doesn't mean you bring every single business into town to get the tax dollars. I just feel strongly that enough is enough on this. We don't need it in Bridgewater. It's not going to do any good. And the question would have to be really presented very clearly so people know what they're giving their opinion on and what the potential could mean later on. He's saying it's just going to be for the medical facilities, but what guarantee it's not going to say, well, let's go further. And I know it's legal in Massachusetts, doesn't mean it's right, but people didn't realize it's not just smoking, it's tons of different forms of it. And there is potential issues with that. And I feel strongly that we should not have it in our town. I don't care how much tax dollars he says. I feel that he should, and other people should spend their time perhaps encouraging other businesses that are more conducive and town friendly than something like that. So I may comment later, but that's what I have to say right now. Thank you.
Thank you. All righty. I don't see anyone else. And do you?
I am scrolling through again. I don't have any additional chat requests, and I do not see any other hands up at this time.
Okay. Moving on to appointments. We have two appointments for the Finance Committee. Nathan Schofield, it's a reappointment. I'll entertain a motion to reappoint.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Mr. Wood, any comments?
Nate is currently the chair of the committee, has been involved for quite a while. I've worked with him during my break in council service when I was on the Finance Committee. He's a good member, and I hope everybody supports the reappointment. Thank you.
Mr. Rushton,
I have done.
any additional comments or questions from any counselors? This requires a roll call vote.
I'm sorry.
Yep.
Mr. Fitzgibbons,
Yes.
Mr. Columbotus. Mr. Columbotus.
Sorry, yes.
Thank you. Mr. Souza,
Yes.
Mr. Rushton,
Yes.
Mr. George,
Yes.
Mr. Wood,
Yes.
Mr. Chase,
Yes.
Mrs. Loesch,
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher.
Yes.
9 in favor, none against.
Alrighty. Second appointment is to the Historical Commission, Matthew Casey. I'll entertain a motion to appoint.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, second. Mr. Rushton, any questions or comments?
I have none.
Mr. Souza,
No, sir.
any other counselors, questions or comments? Mr. Columbotus?
Yes, I think we're quite lucky to have Mr. Casey as an applicant. He seems that he's got significant experience working with historic sites. He worked at the Trustee of Reservations as a historic interpreter, so I think we're quite lucky to have him step up and volunteer his time.
I would agree with him as well as every volunteer we have step up. Couldn't say it better. All right, this requires a roll call vote.
Mr. Gallagher,
Yes.
Mrs. Loesch,
Yes.
Mr. Chase,
Yes.
Mr. Wood,
Yes.
Mr. George,
Yes.
Mr. Rushton,
Yes.
Mr. Souza,
Yes.
Mr. Columbotus,
Yes.
Mr. Fitzgibbons.
Yes.
9 in favor, none against.
Okay, we do not have any hearings tonight. License transactions, petition P 2021-002, annual renewal, common vic, no alcohol. Mr. Dutton, anything to add to either one of these?
No, sir. Fairly straightforward. Just renewals, straight renewals.
Any questions for Mr. Dutton?
Motion to approve.
What? Hold on, Mr. Columbotus, you have a question?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, Jay's Flying Pizza, the location is not located within a business district. So is this, I'm wondering, by virtue, is this business grandfathered in for having existed before zoning
That
change?
is, yep, that's correct. This, I can't tell you the number of years this business has been around, but my understanding is that it long predates zoning.
Okay,
And
thank you.
that does come up on a fairly consistent basis year to year. People ask why they can't have a pizza place at their home because, you know, Jay's Flying Pizza is in a neighborhood and we have to explain to them that the business has operated prior to zoning ever being implemented.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's been there since like the late 50s. So any other questions? All right, I'll entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, Mr. Chase, any comments or questions?
No, none. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Fitzgibbons?
Are we voting on 002 or is it both?
I believe we're voting on both, if I'm not mistaken. These are coming as one, correct?
Well, I just want to correct the town manager. 03 is a new common vic license. It's not a simple renewal, so.
No, you're jumping ahead. We're at 002 and not at 003 yet.
I asked you if you were doing both. That's okay. I'll vote for
Well,
this.
because there are two companies on this particular one. So for the.
Thank you.
Okay, yep. Any other questions before we vote? Okay, this requires a roll call vote.
Mr. Fitzgibbons,
Yes.
Mr. Columbotus,
Yes.
Mr. Souza,
Yes.
Mr. Rushton,
Yes.
Mr. George,
Yes.
Mr. Wood,
Always in favor of pizza. Yes.
Mr. Chase,
Yes.
Mrs. Loesch,
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher.
Yes.
9 in favor, none against.
Okay, moving on to petition P-2021-003. New common vic license, J&K Restaurant, doing business as King Garden, 220 Winter Street. Mr. Dutton, anything to add?
Nothing to add, Mr. President. This is a new license because of a change in ownership.
Okay, any questions for Mr. Dutton? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Okay,
Second.
second. Mr. Fitzgibbons, any questions or
None,
comments?
thank you.
Mr. Rushton,
None.
any other
Thank you.
counselors? Seeing none, this requires a roll call vote.
Mr. Gallagher,
Yes.
Mrs. Loesch,
Yes.
Mr. Chase,
Yes.
Mr. Wood,
Yes.
Mr. George,
Yes.
Mr. Rushton,
Yes.
Mr. Souza,
Yes.
Mr. Columbotus,
Yes.
Mr. Fitzgibbons.
Yes.
9 in favor, none against.
I'd like to wish the new owners the best of luck and thank you very much for investing in a restaurant at a time like this. So that's great. We do not have any presentations. Town manager report. Mitchell School update. Mr. Dutton?
All right, Mr. President, I have not a whole lot of new news on the Mitchell or COVID or budget that you haven't already heard, but I will start with the Mitchell. Construction contracts have been signed with Bacon Construction, so they are under contract. They anticipate mobilizing on or about the 25th, which is coming up, probably the beginning of next week. Realistically. So they are in the process of doing, in conjunction, I think, with the some of the members of the school building committee, doing some neighbor outreach so that neighbors have a pretty darn good idea of what's going to happen over the next 18 to 20 months. I think it's old news now, but it bears repeating. Alluded to it a few moments ago. We've budgeted for the construction phase, a little over 63 million, and the construction bids came in with the alternatives that we had requested at a little under 51 million. So there'll be a substantial savings to the taxpayer because of that lower price. So that is extremely good news. I had promised you last meeting that we would have better numbers. And we did not get those at the last building committee meeting, but I know the OPM is working on the revised budget numbers, and they've got to make all the adjustments for the MSBA funding and so forth. So the next building committee meeting is February 8th, and at that point, the budget should be set in stone, and it'll be something that we can then get up on the website and people can look at. So the timeline is still good. With a projected completion date of July 8th, 2022. And as I mentioned, the district is actually out to bond tomorrow. So we're hoping for a good result there with a fairly low interest rate. Excuse me, once, as I said, once we get all the finalized numbers, we'll put the tax calculator, if you remember the tax calculator we had when prior to the vote, prior to the debt exclusion vote, we had a tax calculator up on the website, and we will put that back up and try to do a comparison. What we had projected at the time would be the impact to taxpayers and what the actual impact to taxpayers will be. So that'll go up there. And as I always say, more information, all the information, but more information than I can give is at bridgewaterschoolproject.com. So it's bridgewaterschoolproject.com. I'm happy to answer questions.
Mr. Columbotus.
So we were budgeting 63 million, but we only have to spend 51. And is that, when you say we with added alternates, are those things that we were hoping to be able to add but weren't in the original core budget?
Well, correct. You don't really know. You've got an amount of money set aside, excuse me, set aside based on estimates. And so when the bid goes out, if they're, you're bidding for a project, but inevitably there are things that, if you could ever afford it, you would actually want to be part of the project. So you actually prioritize those. And I think that we had roughly 8 or 9 pieces. And just to give you an example, one was HVAC, upgrade to a higher,
capacity,
better quality, better quality for cleaner air. Another was doing terrazzo flooring in certain spots that are well worn rather than doing either a linoleum or a rubber floor. So those types of things. So when you add in all of the those alternates that get bid, you can select which ones you want to take, but you have to do it in order of priority. So,
Right.
so the school building committee set a priority list, and so even if they accept all of those alternates, then it still comes in substantially, well, very substantially lower than the 63 million.
So we're getting more for 51 million than we were expecting to get for 63.
That's actually a good way to put it.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Yep.
Mr. Fitzgibbons?
Yes, thank you. And Mr. Dutton, I appreciate the point Mr. Columbotus made, that because of the due diligence of the building committee and everybody involved, and also the fact we had COVID, I'm sure that impacted bids. We're getting something better than we thought. But the other thing that we're getting better than we thought, I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, or Mr. Salmonte, if he's still on the call, can correct me if I'm wrong, is we're probably going to get a better interest rate than we thought, right?
If all goes well tomorrow, we're looking at interest rates in the low twos. We were at the time projecting an interest rate at one point of 5%. So that's a substantial difference over the course of that bond.
It would just be interesting to me, and it may be interesting to folks in the audience and who use the tax calculator to understand what the difference in just the savings on the principal is, but also the savings in the interest rate is over time, because that's probably pretty substantial as well. And you know, it just reflects well on you and Mr. Salmonte's fiscal management of the town. So I appreciate that.
Well, I appreciate that. I'll certainly give credit to the finance team who's you know, brought us to a point where we can get a far better bond rating than we had certainly 8 years ago. And just again, so the council understands the bond rating has a relationship with how that bond eventually gets sold and the interest rate that gets assigned to that. So it actually makes it a more desirable product for the market. And so that's why that bond rating is really important. So they did an exceptional job over the years to really get us to a position or a point where we have a good bond rating. Now, the school is actually doing the borrowing, but in a two-town regional district, the bond rating is set according to the bond rating, the lower bond rating of the two towns. So right now, I believe Rainham and Bridgewater are at the same bond rating, and for a while we were at a lower rating, and so this bond would have gone out based upon that lower rating had we not brought it up. So kudos to the finance folks and Tony.
All right, any other questions for Mr. Dutton? Okay, moving on to COVID-19 update.
COVID-19, we continue to hover around the 100 cases, 100 cases in the community. Regularly, every day we'll have a number come off, but we'll have another number come on, and roughly over the past 3 or 4 weeks, that has hovered around 100 cases, and we've haven't seen a whole lot of movement either up or down. Certainly no trend one way or the other. So the DOC numbers do continue to escalate. Right now, they've got between 40 and 60 cases. BSU has a handful of cases, despite their being on winter break. But students, the limited number of students they have had on campus will be returning from break gradually over the next week, and then classes begin virtually at the end of next week, I believe. So we have, as I've mentioned before, we've seen a number of staff infections. We've also seen a number of staff quarantines, so we're sensitive to that, and we'll continue to be in the red as many towns, probably almost half the towns in Massachusetts are at this point. So I did have a conversation with the district today on their regular call, And they're moving the high school to remote learning just due to the number of cases, both on the student and staff level in the quarantine. So they've got a number of required quarantines, but they do continue when teachers have to quarantine but are healthy, they obviously continue to work remotely during that quarantine period, but that they are moving to an all remote plan for the next week. The other schools seem to be okay, and I talked to the superintendent, as I said, and he's aiming to bring the students back next week to classrooms. I think a lot of people have heard about this sort of English strain of COVID. DPH knows it is now in Massachusetts, but they have not yet differentiated their reported numbers between one strain or the other. Evidently, the new strain is more virulent, so we'll see what transpires statewide because of that. But so far, we don't know what one strain is over the other. So we just get total COVID cases. Good news for our public safety folks. Tomorrow, we are starting a vaccination clinic for public safety officials. We've done this in conjunction with BSU and Rainham in order to get to the required minimum number of doses in order to conduct an actual clinic. And so the process is really as much, the point is as much to get these first responders vaccinated as it is to sort of test the process that we've put in place and prepare for the next two phases of vaccination. So phase one, which is what we're in now, obviously, I think everybody's seen on the news, includes healthcare workers and first responders. That phase will continue through February. Phase two, which I think a lot of folks in Bridgewater are waiting for, includes seniors 65 and over, teachers, school staff, other folks that have chronic illness. That phase is scheduled to begin in mid-February and then last through March. And then finally, phase three, which is really everybody else, is projected to begin in April. We've seen a lot of confusion regarding when and where vaccines will be distributed. We are, as I mentioned, we're prepared and we've developed a process to hold our own clinics, and we are prepared to do that, and we're ready to step in. But honestly, we're waiting for some DPH guidance on how DPH will be rolling out phase two and phase three. And as we get that info, which can't come soon enough, but as we get that info, we will set up the right protocols in order to get folks vaccinated. So you can actually see there's a link to the phase 1, 2, and 3 protocols on the town's COVID-19 webpage. You can get there by just going to the website, which is bridgewaterma.org, and then click on the COVID update, which is you scroll down a little bit and just click on the COVID update, and you'll see the link to the state's phase 1, 2, and 3 protocols and people who get vaccinated under those different phases. So that's what I have on COVID.
Any questions for Mr. Dutton? Mr. Gallagher?
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Dunn, just a question on the vaccination site that I think BSU is setting up for public safety and first responders and all that. Will that site be constant going on when it's open to the general public, or is it just for the initial phase of the vaccination, or will they try to hold this location as a permanent site for future people?
That's a great question. So right now it is just for the public safety. It's a 2-day, public safety, and it's by appointment. And so we've got a process down there. I have spoken with BSU. They are looking to continue in some form or another through phase 2 and phase 3. But again, that requires some work with DPH. And so they've really done nothing more that I'm aware of other than open up the lines of communication with DPH. Nothing is set in stone. So we are prepared to use the senior center that has proven to be a great drive-through clinic location if we need to. And then for phase 3, and this is projecting quite a ways out in relative terms, but multiple sites for phase 3, which may include the regional high school as well. So there's a lot to do between now and then. There's a lot for us to learn and understand, and a lot of communication that has to come from DPH before we can organize and actually even secure the vaccine for those 2 phases.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Dutton? So, Mr. Dutton, go ahead, Mr. Wood.
Thank you. Mr. Dutton, it seems like the organization from the state level is really disconnected. And, it seems like that a lot of locations are having to create their own lists and create their own sites and create, hope that they get a drop in the vaccine that conforms to that. So my concern is, do you see an improvement when we get to that phase 2 and have our 65-year-olds and up and others included in phase 2? How can we be more proactively engaged to make sure that the day they say the vaccine is available, we have a list ready to go and a site ready to go and timing and appointments ready to go?
That's a great timely question, because I've been talking both with our health agent and also with our senior center director, elder affairs director, Emily Williams, about how we should go about. Right now, they field, as you can imagine, hundreds of calls a week, more than hundreds of calls a week. And what they have been doing is recording not recording those calls, but recording the names and phone numbers for the folks that are calling in preparation for preparing a list of sorts. So from the local level, I think between setting up, the protocols, the required protocols that we have to set up for the actual vaccination, and then and making sure that we go through the practice of running down the list of folks that need to be vaccinated at this stage. I think we're learning and developing that process, and I think it's going to work quite well. As we get moving further, my hope is within the next week we can actually come right out and say, if you want to get on the COVID list, call this number, leave your name and address, or leave your name and email address, or leave your name and phone number, and we will coordinate it. But it's, as I said, we're prepared to do that. We just now need DPH and the state to let us know when we'll get the vaccine, what quantities of vaccine that we'll get at each point, and then we can plan around that.
Okay.
So just to follow up, Mr. President, so are you advocating that people call and try to make an appointment now to get on the list? Is that what I heard? People do, and certainly you can't prevent people from calling and getting on a list, even if it's just a running list of people that have called. But I would suggest that it's a better idea to let us do the pre-planning so that we know exactly when this is going to happen and how many, vaccinations that we will, or vaccines we'll actually be able to get. And then we'll absolutely open it up and let people know that it's time to call and time to let yourself be put on a list.
Okay. Mr. Chase, you had a question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Dutton, I'm just wondering if you can comment on whether volunteers, medical volunteers, might be helpful in this endeavor, and how they should go about making themselves known and volunteering for assistance.
Volunteers are always helpful, and certainly as we move into larger scale vaccination sites, we'll definitely be calling out for volunteers. I know the health agent keeps a list. He's actually got a CERT team, which is made up of folks who are trained in this and many other areas, but he also has a list of medical, volunteer medical personnel that are willing to come in and volunteer their time. But if somebody is out there and has a medical training and wants to call the health office, absolutely, we'll make sure that we can put volunteers to work as best possible.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
And I would only add, just to Councilor Chase's point, we've had, great response from staff, but also for volunteers as well. The district has offered up, some of the school nurses, which is quite tremendous, just to make sure that we can vaccinate people as quickly as possible. But we also have a fair number of volunteers that have come in and helped register and so forth. So it's been good.
Thank you.
Moving on to FY 2022 budget.
So I don't have a whole lot on the 22 budget that you didn't already hear, but I will just sort of go through what I touched on very briefly. So our revenue, our 22 budget revenue outlook, as I said, property taxes stable, local receipts, and our state aid is quite uncertain at this point. And we are budgeting currently for a 15% reduction in state aid. So just to give you, rough numbers, so 3.9 million we received from the state last year, this year, and last year, and we're going to budget right now based on a 15% decrease in that money, in that amount. We are virtually certain that we will be pulling again from stabilization, and which is fine. I'll be proposing that, but that we know that that's exactly why stabilization is there. We will not pull from stabilization without a plan to replenish money that we pull from stabilization. So we're quite entrenched in our policies and procedures around how that money comes out and how that money should go back in. And again, the funding priorities that we're looking at, that I'm looking at, obviously revolve around facilities, DPW, building maintenance. That's really kind of our focus. I don't think I mentioned, we do have collective bargaining negotiations coming up. So right now we don't have, any, other than current salary, we don't have any numbers on future salaries at this point, at least for the next, year or 3 years, depending on what kind of agreements we negotiate. So that's I think Tony mentioned, it's really, unfortunately, it's too early to give any kind of revenue sharing number to the district. I think as counselors know, we've tried very hard over the last few years to be try to be very accurate and very upfront with what we think we can actually afford. We've been pretty much on target with our early projections, but this year, for obvious reasons, it's a little too early to estimate the percentage that we're looking at. So that is that's really about it on the budget. I didn't have any silver lining at this point.
Mr. Fitzgibbons.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Dutton, I know you probably can't answer this question, and it's unfortunate that Mr. Salmonti has dropped off the call, but maybe we can follow up, or you can follow up with him to answer the same two questions that I asked from the district. Is what's the expected increase, same store cost year over year for the town, excluding school assessments, because we all know that's separate and whatnot, but operating budget for the town all in, and also percent increase in state aid on average over the last several years, just so I can have a better sense of, where we're looking to get money from. Thank you.
Yep, we can do that.
I have one question.
Yep, Mr. Gallagher?
Thank you, Mr. President. Mike, going back to your comment about state aid 3.9, so you're looking at reducing that about $600,000. But I assume that if the governor's budget comes out and level funds state aid, you're going to rely on that number coming into the town then, is that correct?
That's a safe assumption, yeah. I mean, if that's what the governor's number is, I don't think we would budget a 15% reduction, correct?
Are you hearing from any of your colleagues or anybody as to when we might hear from the governor regarding his budget?
I've heard nothing. I know the governor usually tries to give some indication of what he's thinking, certainly for local communities at the Mass Municipal Conference, which this year is, I think, the end of this week, virtual conference, the end of this week. So we'll be listening to that very carefully just to see if he actually does, as he usually does, or as all governors usually do, try to give us some hint as to what's coming. But other than that, it's been very quiet.
And then when, if you don't hear from if we don't hear from the governor regarding House 1, then obviously you got to go forward. When do you think you'll have some preliminary numbers for the council and particularly the budget and finance committees? We can begin our joint meetings.
We'll definitely have some numbers available to you by the end of next week, and I think February 1st is when I, under the charter, owe the council a first budget, and I'll borrow the superintendent's terms. That in years past has been sort of a needs-based budget. We've tried to make that a more realistic view over the last year or so, last 2 years, I guess. So we're hoping to have slightly more solid figures that you can actually look at probably within the week at this point.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, moving on to Central Square design and traffic design.
All right. My screen. So the Central Square design and traffic reconfiguration, I'll call it. We last discussed that at with the traffic engineer, the McMahon traffic engineer. We discussed sort of the Central Square potential for redesign. We also, I mentioned that I'd be bringing a capital order back to the council for appropriation, which would allow the next phase of engineering. So that would be the point at which, or I figured that would be the piece of legislation that would be probably suitable for a discussion about exactly which direction the council wants to go. I know staff has recommended and the engineers had recommended a two-way, a look at a two-way on the east, two-way traffic on the east side of Central Square, and then less impactful parking and sort of pedestrian use on the west side. But that is a conversation that the council still needs to have, and legislation around the appropriation for the next phase would be the appropriate spot to do that. Tony's working on a sort of a truncated capital plan right now. It's the B, he called it the capital plan A when we were at the height of COVID, and we really had no idea what the future would bring. And then B is coming to you within the next month or so, if I am correct in what he told me today. So that will be coming to you at a future meeting. My guess is the second meeting in February, something along those lines. So that's sort of our schedule there. What I'd also mentioned in terms of the opportunity zone and in terms of sort of overall downtown redevelopment, one of the pieces that I realize we're missing is a really substantial amount of public input on what people would like to see in the downtown area, aside from traffic. Traffic is a more, we'll leave traffic to people, professionals that know what they're doing about traffic. But but the overall look and feel and how we want to reshape downtown, I suggested that we hold a charrette, which is essentially, you know, a real effort to get a lot of public participation from folks who have an interest in what their downtown looks like. So Jennifer Burke had mentioned to me today, we have somebody lined up that can spearhead that charrette, and we're looking at early spring to do that. So it'll give people a chance to weigh in on what they'd like to see in the downtown, and then inform the council and the planning board on some of the zoning changes that probably would be recommended by the master planning process as well. So that's sort of our timeline there. I don't know if I answered the question.
Any questions for Mr. Dutton? Mr. Wood?
So I'm wondering why that isn't part of the comprehensive master plan group discussion today, that we need to have a separate discussion, a separate group. And I'll tell you, since rejoining the council, I've done a lot of research and talking with people about downtown, and if you get 20 people together, there's going to be 25 opinions on it. So it's really a difficult situation to come to a conclusion. But again, the question is, why isn't the comprehensive master plan committee with zoning and all those other facets attached to it taking this into consideration now? Why do we need yet another study group for this?
That's a great question. I wouldn't refer to it as a study group necessarily. I think a charrette is really a true grassroots community input process, and so I think that's kind of one of the pieces we've been missing. And I completely agree. You know, we'll get 20 people there, we'll get 25 different opinions, but I do think it's important that people that use Central Square and use the downtown or want to use the downtown, you know, really have an opportunity to say, you know, what they would like to see there. Not everybody's going to, certainly probably half the people won't get what they want in the long run, but I do think it's important to get a sense of what people really want. The question about the master plan process and why didn't we just sort of add it on there? The master plan process is more dictated by statute, more dictated by Massachusetts law. It's got very specific sections, you know, housing, transportation, economic development, open space, public facilities, land use, historical. So it's probably a little too, you know, the nuts and bolts of downtown are probably a little too specific to incorporate into sort of a 30,000 foot level. And probably, you know, I think the downtown deserves a very specific focus, a little more focused than the master plan process could have given it. That's my take.
Any other questions for Mr. Dutton? Okay. Any other items for the next meeting? Please reach out to Mr. Dutton so he can include it in his report. A continuation on discussion. So in regards to District 5 vacancy, I don't necessarily think we need a discussion. I think we've got clarification. That seat is open for the upcoming vote. My understanding is it'll be a 2-year term. And the reason for that is to keep it within that 3-year cycle of, you know, 3 seats up each year to make sure we kind of have it evened off. So I don't know if there's any additional questions on that, but we did say I'd have it on discussion, and that's basically where it stands. Okay, seeing none. Committee reports. Do we have any committees that would like to report? Okay. Seeing none, we have no legislation for action. We have no old business. We do have new business. Order FY 21-029. Place an advisory question on the April 24, 2021 town election ballot. This is sponsored by Councilor Wood. Councilor Wood, would you like to add anything to this?
Yes, thank you. If I could take a minute or two to introduce it. For those that are not aware, Mass General Law, Chapter 53, Section 18, allows the council and other forms of governance to place a non-binding public opinion advisory question out on the ballot. There has clearly been a shift in public support. The non-binding question, and this answers some of the concerns that the commenters at the beginning of the meeting brought up. A non-binding advisory opinion question does not change the current zoning or ban, so it will have no effect except to tell us the opinion, the current opinion of the voters of Bridgewater. And I went through a couple different draft forms of this. I checked with town attorney for the form. I checked with the town clerk for the timing. It's very narrow in consideration to make it a simple question. And it doesn't mean that if the answer yes, that we have to do anything. It doesn't mean that the answer is no. No obviously means that, the town has voiced its opinion. But the main point behind this measure is to allow the public a safe and non-threatening way to voice their personal opinion regarding sales. With the upcoming election, the timing is an excellent spot so we can ask and get a true sense of public opinion without any additional cost, and the results will be certified. So why use this now? We did not hear a fair and impartial public opinion leading up to the ban. Many people told me that they were afraid to speak out against the ban, or that they were prohibited by employment from doing so. It's been over 4 years since the recreational marijuana has become legal, and we need to listen to the current public opinion using a non-threatening way, and this non-binding method is an excellent way to do that through the secure and private ballot box. Questions?
Any questions? Mr. Souza?
Yes, may I direct a question to Mr. Wood? I understand that there is some discussion at the State House about allowing home delivery of marijuana products. We know that there's 5 places in Brockton, which will be opening soon. We know there's 3 in Middleborough. So anybody in Bridgewater, will they be able to just call those people and have it delivered, and there'll be no restrictions whatsoever? They can just come right into Bridgewater and deliver it? Or can the town say, no, you can't transport that into town?
So if I may, Mr. President.
Go ahead, Mr. Wood.
2 items around that. One is medical deliveries are happening today. So residents in Bridgewater are getting medical deliveries. The medical products are exactly the same as retail products, except that the edibles in medical have unlimited HTCs for grams, whereas the edibles in a retail product is limited to 6. So right now, the Cannabis Commission is holding the language so that if you become a client of one of the Brockton locations, you will not, as a Bridgewater resident, be able to receive products to your house to be delivered right now, unless you hold a medical reason, and then you can have medical marijuana delivered to your house. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Wood? Mr. Gallagher? You're on mute, Mr. Gallagher.
Thank you, Mr. President. My question is not necessarily directed towards Mr. Wood, but my question is directed towards you or the town attorney. And are we having a full-blown discussion about this? Or are we going to be referring this to a committee to come back with an opinion? Or how, I just want to know where we're going with this.
Mr. Rollins, you want my input, or would you like to weigh in?
I'm happy to weigh in. I think procedurally speaking, the discussion should be relative to whether it's going to be referred or not, and then where it will be referred at this stage. Obviously, there's plenty of time for discussion. If there's something relative to a conceivable amendment that would be done now that would help or assist in that committee, wherever you send it out, I would say that it may be appropriate to discuss that now as well. But I think the conversation should stay within the realm of where are we going to refer this, if at all, and kind of keep it there for now.
Okay, if I could continue, Mr. President,
Go ahead, Mr. Gallagher.
I would like to, I'd like to see it referred out to the Rules and Procedures Committee. And I say that for two reasons, actually three reasons. Number one is there's time. Based on the timeline that we're needed, there'll still be plenty of time, provided it comes back from the committee in an appropriate time to put this on the ballot if the council chooses to do so. Secondly is reading through, and this is a question, these are the two questions I really have, and maybe this is why I'd like it referred out, is the reading through chapter 53, 18A, that there is a section at the bottom of that statute that says unless there's a procedure within a city or town charter that governs a question like this to be put on a ballot. And we do have within our charter a requirement that a citizen's petition or referendum question should be signed by citizens, should be forwarded to the council by citizens petition for a referendum question simply like this. That's how I read that. And maybe I'm reading it wrong. So that's one thing I'd like cleared up. And the second, the second thing that I have is I wouldn't approve this as it's written simply because I don't think that we should send anything to the voters restricting if it passes to a specific business, because if this were to pass with the language in this, we would say that only the medical marijuana dispensaries should get the retail licenses, and I don't think that's fair. That's a fair business model to use. Now, they may be in better position to handle that and be in a better position to go up and running quickly. But I think if the town is going to move forward with recreational marijuana, I don't think that we should have any language that says these two dispensaries should get those licenses. So I do think there's enough information on this proposal to send it to a committee. That's just my 2 cents.
So, Mr. Rollins, could you just give some clarification in regards to the citizens petition, if it has any bearing on this whatsoever?
So I don't have the section of the charter open in front of me, but if I recall off the top of my head, that relates to one possibility in which an advisory opinion can come before the voters. I don't think it necessarily precludes other means under Massachusetts general laws. So I think what that was saying was, if you have a charter that says you can only bring things to the voters for an opinion this particular way, then it's probably precluded. But I don't believe, and again, I'm talking off the top of my head, I don't believe that that's what ours says. I think ours gives another option for voters to bring questions for advisory opinions, and mass general laws is just yet another way for that.
Okay. Mr. Gallagher, on the second item, are you proposing an amendment to the order?
No. I'd make a motion that we refer this to the budget. To refer this to the Rules and Procedures Committee.
Okay, I have a motion on the floor. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, Mr. Gallagher, any discussion?
No, I think that there's time to hear from one of our committees regarding this, particularly with the language in the last sentence. I think that it should come back. I think it should come back amended, and it shouldn't go to, if the council is going to forward this to the voters for an opinion, I think that language needs to be taken out.
Mr. Souza?
Sorry. I just agree with Mr. Gallagher on that.
Okay, any other councils with any questions or comments?
So Mr. President, can we make an amendment to that to have a sure date of when it would be returned?
I guess unless this procedurally, I guess we can entertain that motion. What would be the specific motion, Mr. Wood?
I don't have a calendar in front of me of our meeting dates, but hopefully 2 weeks would be enough so it could come back at our next meeting. I'm not sure when I think that's February 2nd, or the next meeting after that is, the next meeting is the 16th, is that right?
I'm looking at my calendar now.
I raised that up because
Yes.
I checked timing with the town clerk, and she needs enough time to get the question on the ballot if it passes the council.
Okay, so Mr. Wood, what exactly is your proposed amendment?
Propose to bring it back before council at the next meeting.
Okay, so that,
I'll second the amendment.
okay. Any discussion on the amendment?
Mr. President,
Mr. Rushton?
so we have an amendment and then an amendment to the amendment. And we originally started out.
There's only one amendment.
There's only one amendment.
Okay, to
Mr.
bring it
Gallagher-
back to rules and committee, correct?
That's a motion, but the amendment Mr. Wood wants to add is a date certain for it to be returned from committee.
Okay, I'm going to hold off for the motion discussion.
Okay, Mr. Columbotus.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have a question for council. I'm wondering if the council has the power to bind a committee to return disposition by a certain date. Is there a mechanism within the charter for the full council to bind a committee to a timeline like that?
There's no mechanism that prevents that from occurring, and I believe the council has the ability to vote to suspend the rules. So I think it's within the purview of the council if the council as a whole, because it's your committees, right? So if you all as a body as a whole decide to suspend your own rules that don't give dates certain, certainly I think you can do that. There's nothing that prohibits you from doing that.
Thank you.
Mr. Fitzgibbons?
If I may, just a suggestion for you to get through the procedural stuff. You can put it on the agenda as a second reading for our next meeting. It can come back with or without a recommendation from Rules and Procedures. I would hope it would come back with a recommendation with any amendments or anything like that. But it certainly is within your purview to give notice that it's going to be on the agenda. And I think that satisfies everybody's questions at this point in time. I'd certainly love to see it worked over by the Rules and Procedures Committee and see what they come up with, if anything different or amendments or whatever, their recommendation.
Mr. Wood?
Yeah, that's fine. I don't know if we need to vote to put it on the next agenda, or you're willing to put it on the next agenda as a second reading. That's fine with me.
Any other discussion? Okay, so let me get this clear. Mr. Wood, we are not adding your amendment. We are voting to send this to Rules and Procedures as written, correct?
Correct.
All righty, we did have a motion and a second. Is there any other additional discussion? Mr. Fitzgibbons.
Oh, no, I believe Mr. Rushton wanted to speak at this point in time, so I wanted to make sure he had that opportunity.
Mr. Rushton.
Thank you, sir. I just want to get my thoughts out before we vote to move this or move forward. I think that as a town councilor, I've heard from a number of citizens on this particular order. As a previous member of the Marijuana Ad Hoc Committee, I did extensive research on that committee, and also a 25-year career in law enforcement, have seen the impact of marijuana and other gateway drugs. Tonight, I'm in objection to moving this anywhere or to approving this order to move any further. We've heard the analogy about the football field, and quite frankly, tonight, I was thinking, as Ms. Taylor mentioned, the goalposts, about we're once again putting a vast majority of residents of the town of Bridgewater on the defensive to try to keep this from moving forward. What I would say to you is that when you look at the Cannabis Control Commission, there's a number of equity issues in terms of license issuing. And what you're seeing from the commission is less and less control by local municipalities in terms of the revenue that's generated in local tax. So by the time this is all passed, Bridgewater has somewhat missed the boat on any potential windfall of revenue that would make this worth it, not to suggest that it would be. Currently, there's 270 licenses established in the state of Massachusetts to distribute or sell recreational marijuana, with another 700 licenses pending. I think for those citizens who want to partake in marijuana in their residential home, there's certainly plenty of alternatives outside of the limits of Bridgewater. So for those reasons, I would ask fellow councilors to do the same and vote no, either moving this to rules of procedure or moving it forward. Thank you.
All righty. Mr. Chase.
Thank you, Mr. President. If I could, I guess I would just like to offer a comment in that regard. And depending upon the outcome that may result from the discussion at the Rules and Procedures Committee, I don't necessarily think it's a bad idea for the voters to have a say as they had in 2016. In 2016, I think we'll all remember, there was a very close vote. Out of, I recall, about 13,000 total votes, if I remember the total number correctly. What I do remember is that the town's prohibition against recreational marijuana at that time was approved by a 150 vote margin, an extremely slim margin given the voting turnout. I don't know that there's anything wrong with putting the question again to the voters. We'll see what comes from the committee, and I'm sure we're going to have much more discussion about this. But at this point, that's my outlook. Thank you.
Mr. Wood.
Mute myself. So the reason I'm interested in putting it back on the committees, on the council's agenda, is so that it doesn't get lost in committee. We have a timeline to get it on the ballot. The ballot is free. There's a lot of concern about the question, but the question is non-binding. And that many people characterize the 2016 vote as a vote against pot shops. And they use the word pot in an adversarial way. They don't say recreational shops, they don't say marijuana shops. They always use the word pot. And that's always an adversarial item. So the only reason we would be afraid of putting the question out to the general public is if we're afraid of the answer. And the answer in general is that it's always been positive. In fact, the question itself we don't need to discuss marijuana at all. The question is, should we put the question on the ballot? Debate the content of the question. That's a debate for the public to have amongst themselves before they go to a ballot box. The question is, should we put the question on the ballot? And I firmly believe the answer is yes, because if the answer is no, then we have a clear and distinct no. But if the answer is not no, then we need to think about it. It doesn't force any change in our current laws. It doesn't create recreational shops where there were none. It doesn't change zoning, and it doesn't eliminate the ban.
Mr. Wood,
there's no purpose in that.
Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this back to the discussion right now is on to refer to rules and procedures. We're getting way ahead of ourselves on everything else. So if I could ask your comments specifically for the referral, I would appreciate that.
So in general, I'm against the referral. If people want to amend it, we can do it here in full council and have that discussion about the question. But in general, I'm against the referral. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any other comments in regards to referring to rules and procedures? Mr. Fitzgibbons.
I have a question, Mr. George.
Yep.
And this is through you to the town attorney, because I don't know the answer on this one. Given that it has had a first reading, Mr. Rollins, and if we don't refer it to the Rules and Procedures Committee, would it naturally be expected to come up on the next agenda? Or how does that, I mean, I know the agenda is set at the discretion of the president, so it's up to him, right? But given that it's been introduced, do we have to in some way dispose of it? And can we do that tonight?
I think
Or can we do it at our next meeting?
I think the cleanest way to do it is to vote whether or not, number one, you want to refer it to a committee. If you do not, you vote to have it appear on the next agenda, or you don't, and it will appear on the next agenda if it's not referred, right? So I think the cleanest way to do it is to vote, because your typical procedure is to send it to committee. So I think that's the first vote that should occur. If it doesn't go to committee, then it comes on next agenda for second reading.
Okay. So we have a motion on the floor. We have a second. There's no other discussion. This requires a roll call vote.
And this is to refer to committee, Mr. President?
Correct, to rules and procedures.
Thank you.
Mr. Fitzgibbons,
Yes.
Mr. Columbotus,
Yes.
Mr. Souza,
Yes.
Mr. Rushton,
No.
Mr. George,
Yes.
Mr. Wood,
No.
Mr. Chase,
You're on mute, Mr. Chase.
Apologies. Yes.
Mrs. Loesch,
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher.
Yes.
7 in favor, 2 against.
Ms. Holmberg,
Yes. Did I miscount? 1, 2, 3, 4,
I'm not
5,
sure.
6,
I did
7.
not hear Ms. Loesch's vote. It
Oh,
may have
I
been-
heard her say yes.
Yes. I heard her say yes too.
Okay. My computer connection's bad. I just missed it. My bad.
Councilor Loesch, am I correct? Thank you.
I didn't want her to be misrepresented. Thank you.
I'd like to make a motion to add this to the next agenda for a second reading.
We have a motion on the floor. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, second. Any discussion? Mr. Gallagher. Well, actually, I take that back. Mr. Wood, you made the motion.
Yeah, so just as Attorney Rollins said, so, the first act is to send it to committee, which we've done in positive nature. Now, the second is to make sure it shows up on the agenda for second reading. That's the motion I'm making now.
I would actually suggest, just for point of order, that there be a vote for what committee it goes to, because we didn't specify that in the first vote. And then if Mr. Wood wants to bring his.
Actually, Mr. Rollins, we said to rules and procedures.
Oh, okay, sorry, I missed that.
Yep.
Okay, then we're fine.
Okay. I forgot who seconded the motion.
Mr. Chase.
Mr. Chase, any discussion?
No, none.
Mr. Gallagher.
So, Mr. President, then if the Rules and Procedures Committee does not have any sort of recommendation by February 2nd, and Mr. Wood's motion passes, then we can take action on it regardless of a disposition from that committee. Is that correct?
That is my understanding, Mr. Rollins.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, this motion requires a roll call vote.
Mr. Gallagher,
No.
Mrs. Loesch,
No.
Mr. Chase,
Yes.
Mr. Wood,
Yes.
Mr. George,
No.
Mr. Rushton,
No.
Mr. Souza,
No.
Mr. Columbotus,
Yes.
Mr. Fitzgibbons.
No.
3 in favor, 6 against.
Okay, motion does not pass. Okay. All righty, moving on to citizens' comments. Again, I will ask any citizens that would like to comment, please keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. And let's keep it respectful as we did under open forum. And for the record, please state your name and your street. Is there anyone that would like to speak for citizens' comments?
I see Mrs. Hanson.
Mrs. Hanson.
Hi, Janet Hanson, 665 Pleasant Street again. I I prefer that this be a done, I admit that I wish we didn't have to go through this again. But if, and a big if this is allowed to be on the ballot as a poll, and I realize that that's what it is, it's not supposed to be binding, but I feel strongly.
Lost Kirk.
Mrs. Hanson, we lost you. All right, is there anyone else? If Mrs. Hanson comes back on, I'll let her speak. Anyone? Are there any other citizens that would like to make a comment?
I saw
I'd like-
Lauren. I'm
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I saw Lauren Webb, and then I saw Miss Robinson.
Okay, Miss Webb, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you. My name is Lauren Webb, and I live at 169 Union Street. And I just wanted to make a comment about the order. I question the language and also what Councilor Wood said about this giving a true sense of public opinion. I think the line from the order is that this advisory question on the town election is a highly accurate method for polling the registered voters. And I just want to question that because recent research from 2010 on local elections found that due to low turnout and uneven turnout, that they're not typically representative of the electorate as a whole. The typical turnout for local elections that aren't tied to presidential elections tend to be whiter, more affluent, and so this research found that the outcomes are suboptimal for racial and ethnic minorities. So, I think we do want to know public opinion on this, but I really question whether polling in this regard is a highly accurate method given the research that exists. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Robinson, before I get to you, Mrs. Hanson, I think you're back, correct?
Hopefully.
Okay.
I keep losing Zoom. So my thing is that the question has to be worded very carefully so people know exactly what they're voting on. It's the way I see, I don't know if it would be worded the way that I see on the ordinance that was, put forth, but that's too vague and there's a lot of questions. Like if you're giving a poll of yes and no, but what are the consequences? If I say yes, what are the consequences? If I say no, it's pretty straightforward, but yes, what does that mean? It means that it only will be at the medical marijuana, or will there be an opportunity that it will later on say, well, let's put it somewhere else too. And, where does it stop? And the poll is to get an opinion as to how it should proceed. But I think the question has to be very, very informative and very, very carefully worded. So there's, no misleading information of, yeah, sure, we want recreation amount. Oh, that's what you mean? You're going to put it near my house? You have to be very specific. So I hope it's not a situation in town. We voted as a town, marijuana or not to have marijuana legalized. Town council with many citizens opposing having it in the town. You voted not to allow it. And here we are 2 years later, and what's going to happen in 2 more years if Mr. Wood doesn't get it passed? Are we going to go through this again and again and again? I just hope that this is worded carefully if in fact that it's allowed on the ballot. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Robinson.
Thank you, Council President. Obviously, I'm speaking on behalf as a private resident. My address is on Holly Lane in Bridgewater. I actually agree and echo the sentiments of the previous commenters about this proposal. Councilor Wood, I know you and I have actually had direct exchanges and conversations about this, and I will reiterate that in this forum that I don't think it matters if you call it pot, that's just a term, right? But at the end of the day, the core issue is that there are actual significant health and financial risks associated with it expanding recreational marijuana usage. I would urge this council to have further conversation about the studies that are out there. There have also been past histories of, criminal charges, and none of these efforts in terms of expanding recreational marijuana do not seem to address reparations around previous criminal histories for people who've been involved with the sale and use of marijuana in the past. But more importantly, I think that we should be really smart about looking at the entire financial impact, which isn't just about the benefit through a tax benefit, but that there are actual very real health and impacts, particularly for other higher risk categories of our population. And and I agree, this isn't just a yes or no poll. Should we, consider this? I think it really needs to be thought through more carefully. So thank you for that.
Dr. Hunt, I believe you want to speak. You're on mute. Still can't hear you. No. Can't. So, try it now, Dr. Hunt. Yeah, I don't know what it is. We don't have you on mute. Okay. All right. Are there any other citizens that would like to speak? Ann, do you see anybody?
I don't.
Okay. Moving on to councilor comments. I'm going to start with Mr. Gallagher.
Thank you, Mr. President. Very good meeting tonight. We had some great discussions from the school committee, finance committee, and citizens discussions tonight. Very civil and orderly, and I think that's a good start to the year. That's all. Thank you.
Okay. Mrs. Loesch.
Excuse me. Thank you. We just spent a lot of time discussing something that was a hypothetical, and we still don't have goals for the town manager. We still don't have a plan for how we're going to rectify the DPW. And we still don't have a plan for many other pressing things that are probably a little bit more urgent than a poll. While I appreciate the effort, we are now rushing to get this done to get on a ballot that could have been presented in September for the April ballot, but here we are in January trying to push it through to get something in April. So I just want to encourage the council to keep your eyes on the prize. I feel like that is a quote from a very wise person, and remind us that we have other priorities and things going on within a pandemic that we potentially could be spending our resources and time on versus talking about polls. We can leave those for Facebook for now. Thanks.
Councilor Chase.
No comment. Thank you.
Councilor Wood.
Thank you. I'm just going to mention Matt for a second, and he can respond later. So he's a good example of where his opinion, his public opinion, must be what it is. He's in law enforcement. And so whether his private opinion differs, we don't know. But if allowed to go to the ballot, he would be able to express exactly what his opinion would be without issue. A lot has changed since the 2016 vote that legalized adult use recreational marijuana in Massachusetts. Tomorrow, Kamala Harris will become the next vice president of the United States. As senator, she was the lead sponsor for the MORE Act of 2019 that, if passed, will end federal prohibition of marijuana. In December, the House of Representatives passed a similar measure by a large majority, the MORE Act of 2020, and also removes marijuana from the controlled substance list. In Massachusetts, the total sales of adult use marijuana in 2020 exceeded $700 million. This is fact. Ordinary people in Bridgewater consume marijuana, and that is perfectly legal. This is fact. Ordinary people in Bridgewater grow marijuana, and that's perfectly legal. This is fact. The question we will debate at our next meeting does not change zoning or ordinances. It is not a question about the council's personal or political positions on marijuana use. We don't need to talk about our views. It's not a question where we need to debate the ban. We don't need to talk about it at all. It's not a question of where we need to debate how much money could go to the school system. The only debate we should have at our next meeting is if we will allow the public the opportunity to express their opinion in a safe, private setting without being subjected to intimidation. In 2016, more than 6,400 people in Bridgewater voted yes in favor of adult use recreational marijuana, which helped propel the measure to pass in Massachusetts. A majority of our districts voted yes. So why didn't any of those yes people show up and speak up in public comment during our hearings a few years ago? I've spoken with many and their answers fall into three primary reasons: fear, or their employment won't let them, or their public opinion has to be different than their personal one for professional reasons. At the ballot box, we can measure the true opinion of the public by allowing that exercise to be a private one. The cost of adding it to the April ballot is close to zero, making it essentially free to ask the question with certified results as the result of the vote. It's easy to see that public opinion has changed over the years, and we need to be able to measure that public opinion in a safe, secure manner, and a non-binding advisory question method is just that. We seek public opinion in a fair and equitable way. Finally, the only time you don't ask a question is when you are afraid to hear the answer. We should not be afraid to ask the public this question and let them express their opinion. Thank you.
Mr. Rushton.
Thank you very much. Just have a brief statement. I just wanted to thank the town manager, the town employees health department, and once again, our partners at BSU, their health services staff, helping to coordinate tomorrow a regional phase 1 vaccine for public safety. It's been a lot of work. I've seen it on my own end, so I understand the pains that they've gone through to make this happen. It's going to be the next 2 days. Special kudos to the fire department that helped organize this as well. So just wanted to mention that publicly. Thank you.
Mr. Souza.
I would just like to echo Councilman Gallagher's comments earlier, and that is all.
Okay. Mr. Columbotus.
Nothing tonight, thanks.
Okay. Mr. Fitzgibbons.
Well, I'll start out by, as I always do, thanking you for running a very good Zoom meeting here. I appreciate that, Mr. President. And yeah, especially with 3 different bodies meeting tonight, certainly do appreciate that. Mr. Dolan, in his first joint meeting, I believe, as the chairman, I just want to call him out as doing a great job and appreciating his service. And rather than call out the whole finance committee and everyone I see on my screen, I do have to give one more shout out though, because I see Mr. Gelfi is still here. And thank you for representing the town of Rainham, Mr. Gelfi, throughout the whole town council meeting. Hopefully it was entertaining as your selectmen meetings are. Thank you, Mr. George.
Just a couple comments to quickly reiterate the thank you for the school committee. Thank you for the finance committee. I thought the discussions were very well prepared, put together. It goes without saying that anyone that was in attendance for the meeting, that was on Facebook, if you have any additional questions for the school committee, go to the school committee, finance committee. I know that they're very receptive to questions, and I think what I would really like to get across to people is, don't wait for a meeting to ask a question. Ask the question ahead of time, try to get ahead of it. Obviously, if it comes up in a meeting, that's great. But the more information we can get out to the public, the more questions we can answer, I think the better that we all feel moving forward in whatever direction that we decide. I want to also say thank you to everyone involved in regards to the discussions today. I realize it's a very important topic to everyone. And this isn't the only one that comes across our table, but I was very appreciative of people coming well prepared to speak, sticking within the timelines, and also sticking within the parameters of those discussions. And I'm a firm believer that if we can have civil discourse, that, you know, the ultimate goal is to just to make our community better, whatever that looks like or sounds like in that respect. But I do appreciate that. I will entertain a motion to adjourn. We don't have any, I'm sorry, we have no executive session. All right, so moved. Second, this requires a roll call vote.
Mr. Fitzgibbons,
Yes.
Mr. Columbotus,
Yes.
Mr. Souza,
Yes.
Mr. Rushton,
Yes.
Mr. George,
Yes.
Mr. Wood. Mr. Wood.
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Chase,
Yes.
Mrs. Loesch. Mrs. Loesch,
I don't see her.
I think she left. All right, Mr. Gallagher,
Yes.
8 in favor, none against.
All right, everyone have a great evening. Take care out
Thank
there.
you. Good night.
Thanks to all of you.